This is the BBC.
Dear brothers and sisters, all are welcome here at the Confessions podcast, whether saint or sinner.
Didn't the Romans used to use moss anyway? And actually, moss seems to me a much more comfortable
Moss?
and effective.
Oh, no, imagine that.
It would be moist and wet.
Ugh.
Soft.
Yes.
It grows. It's natural. It's environmentally friendly.
Oh, hello. All right. Welcome to another Confessions podcast from your friends at the BBC. A little bit casual there at the start. Sorry about that.
So.
A little bit more formality would probably be very good. Hello and thank you for downloading us. This is where sinful members of the Radio 2 listenership, and boy are there a lot of them, tell their tales of deceit, debauchery and deception, seeking dispensation from Sister Bobby, who's here.
Hello.
Dial that down a little.
Okay.
Yeah. Sister Bobby, who's here.
Hello.
Thank you. And Brother Matt.
Hello.
Thank you.
Yeah.
A little bit too camp, maybe. Anyway, this week for your listening pleasure, we have Captain Cheese Lover's confession in the Airbnb tonight about the party upstairs. Stephen's tale, Power to the People, the Blackout Street. Alan's mix-up, Mama, We're All Sorry Now. That's the pumpkin puree one. Plus another classic confession we have unearthed from the crypt, chosen at your suggestion. First, we start with Jeanette's little white lie. Carry on, wayward son.
Simon Mayo's Confessions podcast. Please be seated.
Dear Father Simon and the forgivers of folly, I need to ask for your forgiveness for a totally unpremeditated sin dating back only 2 years to the summer of 2015. Not an awfully long time to carry my guilt, but a fifth of the lifetime of my 10-year-old son Carter, whose forgiveness I also seek. Driving through the Sussex countryside one sunny day, this particular summer back in 2015, myself in the front passenger seat and Carter sat immediately behind me, we passed a field full of gleaming solar panels. Carter, then aged 8 and a very inquisitive child, naturally asked, "What are those doing there?" And I simply answered, "It's a solar panel farm," and thought that would be ample explanation. "What's that then?" says the little voice behind my seat. And then I uttered the most logical reply and began down what became a lengthy path of deception. "It's where we grow solar panels."
Yeah.
Totally obvious, I thought. Perfectly logical answer. Potato farms grow potatoes. Hop farms grow hops. What else would a field of solar panels do? Thankfully, his dad managed to keep a straight face, and I resorted to clamping my hand over my mouth to smother my sniggering. But Carter's brain was in overdrive. How do they grow then? After a small hesitation, "Well, you know the tiny solar panel in the corner of your calculator?" "Yes," says Carter. "Well, those are really seed panels. They plant them in rows, and if they get enough sun and rain, they grow, and then when they're big enough, they get harvested and put on rooftops." Still perfectly sensible, if you ask me.
Yeah, love it.
A few minutes pass in silence, then, "How do they know how far apart to plant them?" is the next question. So I had to think quick, but came up with, well, if the solar farmer, imagine, wants to grow 4-foot panels, he or she plants them 4 feet apart. Then when they're touching, they're just the right size. Phew, nearly caught me out on that one, but I escaped. The journey ended, life carried on in chaos, as it does with 4 kids, 2 dogs, 2 cats, a turtle, and 2 businesses. Blimey. Solar farms were a distant memory when Carter appeared around a corner a few days later with, "So where do the tiny seed panels come from in the first place then?" Once I registered what he was talking about and got over the shock of a subject having stayed on his mind so long, I pulled myself together and replied, "Well, once the big panels have been on the roof too long, they don't work so efficiently. So they get taken down, cut into seed panels, and then reused. That's why solar panels are so environmentally friendly." I gave myself a mental high five and really thought that that would be it. What else could he possibly need to know about a solar panel? Well, Carter is an interesting character. He spends a lot of time on his own creating this and that, and always has at least 5 projects on the go. So I don't know why I was surprised when a few days later, after laying the solar subject to bed, so I thought, he asked for some pocket money to buy a pocket calculator from the pound store in town. Yeah. And did I have a spare pot and some compost that he could borrow?
Quite right.
Well, what could I do? I'd painted myself into a corner. A trip to town followed, and Carter, delighted in taking the calculator to pieces, with his set of screwdrivers. The pot was filled, the seed panel placed on top and watered, then placed in the sunniest spot just outside the back door where he'd be able to water it and check its growth each day. Now, this is only of use to Matt and Bobby. I've got a photograph of him doing just that, okay?
Oh, superb.
It's a lovely photograph,
Yes,
you
it
can
is.
imagine, of an 8-year-old lad, very proud.
He's so excited. He can't wait for it to grow into a massive panel.
Like growing cress.
Who's going to disappoint him now, I wonder?
He's pointing at the pot
Yeah.
where this huge panel is about to grow
here
from.
it comes, everyone.
Well, Carter dutifully watered the baby panel, and after 2 weeks or so of tender care, he returned home from school one afternoon to find it had doubled in size.
Wow!
It was a particularly sunny week, so I wasn't surprised it had grown. I had convinced myself it was true. The care continued, and this wonder of nature repeated itself twice more until the panel measured 5 centimetres square.
Ooh.
Autumn followed, and winter meant that the panel obviously didn't get enough sun to grow anymore that year. In truth, the garden centre had stopped selling They'd stopped selling the little solar garden lights that I'd been dismantling. I really should have thought ahead and stocked up, but I was completely out, and so were they. Can't grow anymore. I must point out that I was not the only guilty party in this ruse, as family and friends all joined in merrily once they were primed, with the exception of his school teacher, who told him it was all nonsense. God bless the school teacher. But Carter quite often thinks he knows better than his teacher. So that was an easy obstacle to hurdle. The reason I now feel compelled to confess is twofold. On a recent mum's night out, i.e. wine-fueled evening of moaning/boasting about our offspring, I relayed the story of Carter's solar panel as requested by those who had heard about it through their children, and they were utterly horrified. They insisted I must come clean as I risked ruining his faith in humanity. I disagree. Carter has a wicked sense of humour, and part of me actually wonders if he's known all along and just enjoys watching me squirm. Secondly, he's about to sit a scholarship exam with an interview, and I'm slightly nervous that I may have ruined his chances should he get asked about his projects and he picks this one to talk about. Someone recently asked him how his panel was doing, and he said it hadn't grown recently, so he thinks it needs a bigger pot. So there is a distinct possibility that he really does believe me. I'm going to have to sit him down for a little chat in the next couple of weeks. Maybe seeing the look on his face will be punishment enough for me, says Jeanette. So I seek forgiveness from Carter. Obviously, I may have ruined his trust in adults forever. However, I do not seek forgiveness from his teacher for poo-pooing his theory, or more correctly, dismissing my perfect logic. Well, Jeanette, whether you've taken this too far, I don't know. I think all you have to do is play Carter. I mean, Carter may well be listening at this point and now looking at you with those eyes which make you feel about 3 inches high. Anyway, let's see what Sister Bobby makes of that first of all.
What I love about this, I love the fact actually that you ran with it. You started something and you just kept going, and it got bigger, and you didn't give it up. And
digging that hole.
Well, it wasn't. Well, yes, in the plant pot and get a bigger one. What I loved it also, of course, he knew about nurturing plants. You have to take care of it. You have to water it. Maybe it needs a bigger plant. You have to be watchful of it, and also you have to be patient. So there's a kind of load of tenacity and patience that Carter's learning here, which I love. And whether he knows or not, well, I don't know. I think if you're coming clean now, and this is part of the coming cleanness, and he is listening, I think he should forgive you, because what he's got is a really inventful storytelling mum. You're forgiven, by the way.
I'm now looking at this photograph again of Carter, who looks like a super proud, very excited 8-year-old, pointing with great glee and excitement at this pot, expecting wonderful things to happen, and wondering what he's going to be making of this.
And in a way they did, didn't they? Because it did grow, it got bigger, so well. In fact, I think Carter comes out of this well, Jeanette comes out of this well. The only person who doesn't come out of this well is the school teacher, yet again. It's the school teacher going, oh no, I don't think you'll find the garden and grow the solar
school
panels.
teacher is the voice of sanity in all this.
It turns out Father Christmas doesn't live in the smoke alarm, no. And always the school teachers with the reason and logic. So I am going to forgive. I was hoping there was going to be a line about, well, when a mummy solar panel and a daddy solar panel love each other very much. I thought it was going to go down those lines. Sadly not, but I'm going to definitely forgive anyway.
The Confessions Podcast.
Father Simon and the Synod of Salvation. This comes from Alan, who also says, that's not my real name, by the way. He's still living in fear.
Oh, that's a good
as
sign.
a result of this
I like this already.
tale. I have asked that my confession be read under a pseudonym as it involves a delicate subject, my mother. Now, my mum, in a lot of ways, is an amazing person, so you know that there's a little caveat coming.
In many ways.
In spite of her advanced years, she still drives, sings in a choir, very involved in her church, does a lot of charity work, and generally leaves people saying, I don't believe it, when they find out how old she is. However, she does have her faults. It's a longer paragraph. One is that she's totally self-obsessed.
Okay.
It's quite hard-hitting, this. Every conversation has to focus on her, and if it drifts away onto other subjects, she'll shamelessly drag it back by saying something like, anyway, to return to what I was talking about.
Good for her. I like this.
She'll say anything to keep herself at the centre of the stage. Old anecdotes we've all heard a dozen times. Tales about friends of her friends who we've never met and have no interest in. Thank you very much, you name it. It's all about her. Her. She could bore for England.
Ouch, Alan.
Loves her, really. You know, loves working for charity.
Say it like it is. But that's not all. She also seems to think that other people only exist for her benefit. She wasn't content until my brother and I married, providing her with daughters-in-law, who she could then treat as the daughters she'd never had, whilst proving the truth of the old joke, how many mothers-in-law does it take to change a light bulb? Only one. She just holds it in the air and expects the world to revolve around her. Different times, those jokes.
Yes.
Anyway, as for grandchildren, we couldn't produce them quickly enough for her so that she could get her quality grandmother time. For instance, she once babysat for my wife and I, and when I got back at the end of the evening, we asked if the children had been okay. Fine, she said. They were a little bit unsettled, so I read them a story. The children had a slightly different take on this. When asked next morning what kind of a night they'd had, they said, Granny made us wake up so she could read us a story. Obviously, Granny was going to get her quality time in with her grandchildren, no matter what, no matter whether they were asleep or not. And last but not least, she's really demanding, particularly when it comes to meals. The rest of the family think it's just another way to remind everyone how important she is, but whatever the reason, everything has to be just the way she wants it, and it's because of this that I have to beg forgiveness. One day, Mum came round for dinner, for which my wife had prepared a trifle for dessert. Now, my wife's trifles are something really special, and she puts a lot of effort into getting them just that way. However, when Mum saw it, she said, "Oh, that looks much too rich. Could I just have some ice cream instead?" I saw my wife's mouth compress into a thin line. "I'm not sure we've got any," I said. "Well, could you have a look?" I gave in. As I headed for the kitchen, Mum added, "And maybe a meringue nest? and some tinned fruit, if you've got, just on top of the nest, would be good.
A completely different dessert to
better than this.
This trifle."
Well, I raided the freezer, not expecting to find any, but to my surprise, there at the bottom was a tub of toffee ice cream. Meringue nests and tinned fruit were found in the cupboards, and the requested dessert was served. Even this didn't seem to be quite enough for her, because once she'd finished, she claimed that the dessert was fine, but the ice cream tasted a bit funny. Anyway, sometime later, she got her coat and went home. After waving her goodbye at the door, "Bye, Mum, miss you already," I headed back for the kitchen, where my wife was quietly and understandably fuming. "I can't believe she turned down the trifle for some ice cream," she said, "and she even complained it tasted funny." "How can toffee ice cream taste funny?" I fetched the ice cream back from the freezer. Armed with 2 spoons, we tried it to see just how it did taste. "Well, she's right," my wife said, "it does taste funny." And realization dawned. "That's because it's not toffee ice cream, is it?" I replied.
Oh,
no.
no. Oh, no.
No, it's roasted pumpkin puree. Precisely. You see, Father Simon, the previous Halloween, we'd made a pair of pumpkin lanterns, and after hollowing them out, we'd roasted and pureed the flesh to make into soup at some future date. And that was the best thing we had to freeze it in. It was an old toffee ice cream tub, and for a second we stared at each other in shock, and then we burst out laughing. And so, Father Simon, I asked forgiveness not for serving my mum frozen pumpkin puree in a meringue nest with some tinned peaches. If she'd had the trifle, it wouldn't have happened. What I ask forgiveness for is the fact that even after several years, it still makes me laugh, and it's particularly consoling every time we're treated to another one of Mum's little whims. I've only sent this confession in because I know Mum is a devoted Radio 4 listener. And she'll never hear it because she loves Eddie Mayo. Anyway, Alan, not my real name, still living in fear of his mum, as we can tell, because I think an awful lot of people would say, Mum, it's a trifle. It's a really nice trifle. If you don't want it, then that's fine, and I'm not going to get you a meringue nest with some tinned fruit. Anyway, I think Alan is slightly scared. Let's see what Sister Bobby makes of that.
It's difficult, isn't it? Because someone else could say, could I just have the jelly from that and not have the other rich bits? She didn't have to have all the sections, did she? I mean, what is it? Cream, custard, jelly. If it was too rich, just have the jelly bits. That's what she could have said.
Or just say, I'll be fine with that. Just I'll have a cup of tea.
Yeah, I'll be absolutely fine. So she does seem quite difficult. It's really difficult with mums and dads because it's a privilege to be able to argue with them. That's what I think.
I think if we knew Alan's mum, we might be alongside Alan.
Yeah, Alan, I think. I mean, there was no malice. You didn't intend to do this. It wasn't like payback for her difficultness. It was a complete accident.
It was.
And so I'm glad you had a laugh about it afterwards, because actually it seems that you showed no grudge against her and no annoyance against her, and you still fed her a tea, and you still found a meringue nest, and you still found some strawberries in the back of the cupboard in a tin. So good on you. I think it's the only way to deal with it, Alan, because she won't always be there. So you are forgiven.
See, sometimes you'd have a confession like this and then something is done out of spite and they deliberately spike the food or something like that. But this is not what happened. It's just that because she was fussy and picky, she ended up with roasted pumpkin puree ice cream as opposed to a proper dessert.
Will no one speak up for the mother here?
No.
I think, well, I certainly will. I mean,
is this because your mother-in-law is staying with you at the moment?
I'm fabulous, and she's probably cooking right now, listening right now, and I can't wait, even though I'm on a starvie. But I think you have to respect the fact that she says, I'm sorry, I'm not having that trifle. It looks far too rich. Make me something else. Because none of us would have the nerve to say that. We would all go, oh, right, I'll have some of your trifle, even though it looks not very nice. Or we'd say, I won't have any dessert, thanks, because I don't like your trifle. No, she stands up and says, I will have a meringue nest with some tin fruit and some ice cream. And I think that I think we should all stand up and applaud, because
no, you don't.
Yes, I do.
No, you don't.
Yes, I do. And I think that's what we all need, a little bit more backbone.
Your
like
mother-in-law is
Alan's
staying
mother.
and you are scared.
Yes, a little.
That is the truth of it.
But I'm very, very happy with the caramel shortbreads. Yes, forgiven. Not forgiven, because we're standing up. Will no one speak up for the mothers? That's what I'm saying.
Absolutely shameless.
Simon Mayo's Confessions Podcast.
Thanks to Alan for Mama, We're All Sorry Now, which many people got in touch to say they thought Alan was describing their own mother. And they thought the pumpkin puree was going to be something much, much worse. It was amazing how many people said, that's got to be my mum. That has absolutely got to be my mum. Still to come, the confession that made Matt give us a fascinating insight into his tolerance levels.
I have thoroughly unreasonable limits. I will not tolerate any noise whatsoever after the hours of darkness have descended. If you do more than whisper, I am knocking on your door.
Well, at 5 o'clock in the evening?
5 o'clock in the evening, I am knocking on your door.
Says someone who's well acquainted with Dr. Mosh.
Yes. How am I spelling whatsoever there?
What? It's a little bit of Spanish, I think. Right, let's peer into the parish notice board. You don't peer into a notice board, do you? Let's have a look at the parish notice board.
Yes. Well done.
See what delights it has. The postbag is completely strange this week. Bobby has this because she's building a part up, and she has this.
Mary Palmer from Somerset emailed to say, good evening, Simon.
Good evening, Mary.
And the posse of penitents, that's Matt and I, and everyone else. I finally got round to downloading the Confessions podcast, and you were wondering if ever a whole bus full of people listened to the Confessions.
Yes.
That was what I was wondering. I drive a minibus for a local school taking children home after school clubs. I thought I'd let you know that the normally overexcited, happy, noisy children go strangely quiet when the confession begins. So yes, it's only a minibus, but we're listening. How big do you think we've got as our biggest kind of audience? Like one audience? I mean, not one audience. I mean, one collection of people.
All in one place.
All in one place.
Well, in the minibus, there could be like 12 or 15.
Yeah, but we've had a big coach full. One of those big, ones that go up the country and back.
I don't know. What do you say, Matt?
I say 60.
I
all
say
in one
106.
Place. 106 all in a room. Can't get out.
Do you have something from the postbag?
Yes, I do. James from Berkshire emailed to say, I regularly download the Confessions podcast on a Friday afternoon for my journey home and find myself giggling like a schoolgirl while circumnavigating the busy roads of Berkshire. However, I was frustratingly forced to wait until Saturday to listen to the podcast this week. I shook uncontrollably with laughter, snorted out loud, and made a proper fool of myself in front of all the other parents patiently listening to our kids playing in their morning brass band practice. I thought I'd be able to keep a lid on my amusement and listen discreetly, but found the Jumping Jimmy Thunder, Wicker Basket and Fire Damage Coffin references too much to bear. My composure deteriorated rapidly from there as the rest of the podcast played out. I didn't turn it off, though. That's commitment for you. Keep them coming. 5 stars.
5 stars?
Yeah.
Rabbit Pie confessed his own sins on his review of the podcast. 2 years ago, I succumbed to aggressive lobbying and purchased 2 new rabbits on the condition they were regularly fed and mucked out by someone other than me. Funnily enough, that didn't happen. It never, ever happens.
No.
Anyway, every week I go through my own Amdram production of what? What? I say.
Yeah.
And then I say, what again? Am I cleaning out the rabbits? Me? Before retiring to the garden and drawing out the aforementioned chore for just long enough to listen to the Confessions podcast in peace and then flouncing back into the house. Me? To announce that thanks to me, the rabbits are now fed, clean and happy. Not you, who agreed to do it in the first place. Luckily, my wife doesn't listen to the podcast, so I feel my secret is safe. All right. Thanks, Simon and gang, and thanks to the sinful population of the British Isles. Now, and thank you, Rabbit Pie. Slightly worrying, actually, that he's called himself Rabbit Pie.
Yes, I just noticed that as well.
Anyway, Bobby confessed her sins on last week's podcast for a Blue Peter badge that she didn't earn.
I've never used it, though, and I've still got it.
It's too late.
I think I have to return it to Blue Peter.
Matt,
Maybe
you
I'll
have
do it.
confessed before
I have.
to various things.
Yes, I remember very early on we did team confessions, and so I did the one about
bring
me.
that back.
No, let's not.
What did you do?
I think I should confess to that time when obviously I do this ridiculous thing of having starvy days. And,
How ridiculous.
And on an eaty day, as I was going home, I decided to get some chips in the chippy on the way home, as well as having a tea.
On a starvy day?
No, this is on an eaty day, but I was starved, so hungry. And I was spotted by a member of our team, and then that member of the team told Simon, and Simon asked in front of the entire team, "Oh, Matt, did you enjoy your chips last night?" And I flat out denied that I'd ever had any chips.
What a big fat fibber.
I did, and then I owned up to it. So in a way, I didn't do anything wrong.
You lied
Well,
and had
obviously,
chips.
And
the
cheated.
chips, yeah.
And also, you stole the chips from an old lady.
Probably, yeah.
Before we head back to the confessional booth, time for the slightly naughtier part of the notice board, the non-compliant confession. This one from Dave about the time... he fed a llama chips in Germany. I don't know if it's illegal in Germany, but anyway. What happened when the chips decided to make a shock reappearance, and the physical violence and bodily fluids that followed is an example, frankly. Exactly.
Well, we don't condone that,
What is
obviously.
not fit for this parish?
No.
Get out. Now, let's talk about Barry. Barry, just because you were jealous of your boss's new car with its personalised number plates, that was no excuse for mocking up a fake reg plate that your unwitting boss drove about with for the whole day, especially since, 1, the new plates spelt out a certain part of the male anatomy.
I'll bet they did.
And 2, he was a police chief inspector. Driving on official business.
Good. I like that.
We could have done that one.
Yeah. I think so.
Mark, you're one of a growing number who realised before pressing send that your confession was just too shocking, so you instead just sent us a 2-line summary, which is happening quite a lot. It basically involved hitting a wood pigeon at high speed on the motorway and the deceased bird landing in an open-top Ferrari, which was going the other way.
Wow!
Was the bird
What a
okay?
shot.
The pigeon was fine.
My guess
I'm
is
sure
not.
the
Yes.
pigeon it didn't survive.
Maybe it was just a bit, a
Stunned?
bit of a head,
Yeah.
just a
But,
headache.
but those
You
kind
know.
of things happen.
Yes.
I would have been. I think that could
Take
have
your
made it.
chances, don't you, when you're a wood pigeon? So.
And Elaine, your story about being violently ill at a house you were working in and then using a bar of soap to clean the mess before putting the bar of soap back in the sink
Lovely.
is disgusting and thoroughly reprehensible.
Don't condone.
But thanks, it was quite funny. If you've got a confession to get off your chest, as long as it's not like any of those, although they were very good, Send it, please, to confessions@bbc.co.uk. Hang on, this notice is still on the notice board. Must be important. If you're, I'm acting here, if you're a devout member of the Listening Collective, please remember to subscribe to the podcast and also subscribe on behalf of all your family members. Just get hold of their phone.
Keep subscribing.
Find out what their code is, and then you can get this wonderful confessional podcast to be part of their lives and think you'll just have so much more in common together. Okay, back to this week's Confessions, and time to revisit Stephen's really electrifying, oh dear, confession, power to the people. Father Simon and the aggregation of exoneration.
Oh, like a bit of that, yeah.
I think that's another new one, isn't it?
It is, definitely.
The following tale takes place in the late 1970s. By the way, don't try any of this at home.
Different times, everyone.
All
Different
of it.
times.
All of it. Takes place in the late 70s when I was a happy 9-year-old. If you've seen Stranger Things,
oh yeah,
you know they all get up to stuff without parents sort of looking. It's not, there are no monsters involved in this, but anyway. When I was a happy 9-year-old enjoying life in a suburban cul-de-sac, this being a relatively new road, all of the utilities, electricity, phone lines and such were buried underground rather than being hung from poles, as in the older streets in the area. The only visible sign of these utilities were a few junction boxes placed at intervals along the footpaths. The electricity company's logo was moulded into the top of the cover, so it was obvious even to us kids that these boxes contained electricity and that messing with them would probably end badly. This is a good lesson to learn. It had, however, been noted that one of the boxes had its screws left open, and so the cover was removable. One day, my fellow 9-year-old friends and I had a look inside by lifting the cover up a few inches. We weren't entirely sure what we would see: whirling gears, magic electricity sprites, fairy dust and goblins. Even to our juvenile eyes, the sight we saw didn't particularly look very safe. Everything was exposed, only a few inches apart, only kept apart by wires, inherent stiffness. But hey, as they say, different times, you know. Speaking of different times, I'm surprised to recall that not one of us thought to tell anyone about this. Didn't tell our parents or anything. Anyway, we'd all agreed that the contents of the box were too dangerous to be truly interesting, and as the summer passed, we forgot all about the loose junction box cover. It's a good thing, just leave it well alone, don't go anywhere near it.
Intriguing.
Then one evening in September, it was getting dark, and as the street lights came on, I looked around for my bike, which I had left nearby only a minute earlier. One of our group, Ian P., known for being a bit of a lad, had jumped on it, and now that he saw that I was looking for it, was riding past me repeatedly, ignoring my request to have it back. We've all got annoying friends like that. I waited a while, pretending I didn't care, hoping he would become bored with my lack of response, but it wasn't working, and after a while I became frustrated. So as he came relatively close, I lunged at him, aimed for his shoulder, hoping to knock him off my bike. I was partially successful, and he lost his balance, staggering off the bike and almost falling to the ground. The bike, however, travelled another few feet, and with a crash, struck the loose cover of the electricity junction box, knocking it over to around a 45-degree angle.
Oh dear.
What followed next will live in our memories forever.
Bonfire night.
From under the box came the deepest, loudest humming, spitting, arcing sounds I'd never heard, like arc welding. And then...
What?
Oops. Armageddon.
Well, it wasn't quite that. From the gap created by the tilted cover, there came an intense orange light. The footpath was showered with masses of orange sparks and tiny molten blobs of metal rolling everywhere, all of which was quickly obscured by clouds of thick black smoke. We realised the streetlight nearby was flickering, and as we tore our eyes away from the fiery disaster occurring in front of us, we realised to our horror that all of the streetlights were flickering. This is just like Stranger Things. And so were all of the lights in all of the houses, in all of the streets. After a few seconds, all the adults and all the children began simultaneously pouring out of the front doors of their houses, shouting in terror and panic, "Is it the end of the world?" As they looked around, they realised it wasn't just their own lights and TVs that were flickering, but they were in the middle of a whole street full of houses and street lamps flickering in unison, accompanied by the hideous sound of a massive electrical short circuit. Oh, that's quite good. Here comes the sound of a massive electrical short circuit. How did that fuse box end again?
Oh, that's big.
Just like that. After what seemed like eons, but was probably about 15 seconds, there was a massive bang. All right, then. We just had the massive bang. And the whole street went totally dark and completely silent. The only sounds were those of shocked parents explaining to their terrified children that no, the end of the world was not occurring. As soon as the power went off, I grabbed my bike and I ran home. "There's a power cut," my dad says as I came into the door of a dark house. "Oh, really?" "I noticed all the street lights were out," I say, trying to sound nonchalant. A word I didn't know when I was 9. "It was really strange. The lights flickered for ages," said my older brother. "Yes, very strange that," I mumbled as I fled upstairs. I was terrified. I had blacked out, not just our street, but all the streets. I was almost certainly going to go to jail for this. A while later, there were flashing lights zooming across the wall of my bedroom. I risked a peep out from the window. There was a van parked down the street with a rotating orange beacon on its roof. They're not looking for me. Am I going to jail? I don't know. Age 9, I hadn't yet realised that the emergency services only use blue lights and not orange, but I went to bed, partly because it was late and partly to hide under the bedclothes, but I was unable to sleep for a long time waiting for the knock on the door. The next morning, I looked out of my window to see if they'd resorted to fingerprinting or sniffer dogs yet. I watched a lot of TV detective shows back then. The van was still there, but now it was daylight. I could see that it said "Emergency Repair Service" written underneath. The electricity was back on, and there were barriers around a long trench in the footpath, stretching for about 5 yards from the ill-fated junction box. After a few days, there were no inquiries at my parents' door, so I began to relax. I live in a different country now, says Stephen. That's a little bit drastic. But whenever I pass through my old street, I always notice the replacement strip of concrete leading to that box, and I smile wryly to myself. So, who do I seek forgiveness from for our episode of unplanned electrical interruption? Well, not from the residents of our road. Power cuts were common in the late 70s, happened all the time, government sanctioned mostly. So most people were well prepared with candles. Ask your parents, it's a 3-day week. I also don't seek forgiveness from the electricity company, who, it seemed, had not yet discovered insulation, or safety procedures, come to that. I do, however, seek forgiveness from my friend Ian P., who I mentioned earlier, who, whilst being a bit of an annoying idiot at times, didn't deserve to almost meet an electrically charged end whilst only larking about on my bike. Well, I mean, when you think about it, nobody did anything on purpose. Nothing was deliberate. I guess they could have told their folks or something, but it seems to be the electricity company, wouldn't you say, Bob?
Are you leading the jury, Father Simon?
Well, I might be.
I mean, the thing is, you're only 9. You could have told your parents, who could have told the electrical company to, repair the box and screw it back down again. That might have made a difference. The thing is, it was EMP's fault, because he started it by being really narky and thinking he was funny. Because if he hadn't done that, then it wouldn't have happened. However, worse things could have happened. A small child or a kitten could have fallen in, and the same could have happened. It could have been worse, couldn't it? So maybe...
Thank heavens it wasn't a kitten.
Yeah, maybe. It was a good thing in the end. I'm interested which bike it was. Was it like a
chopper.
Mini?
I bet it was a chopper.
Was it a Pooch Mini Sprint or something like that? Basically, you're forgiven. It's not you. No. You didn't do anything wrong. You're forgiven.
If those boys had been playing Dungeons and Dragons, they might have ended up on the flip side with monsters to fight. But anyway, they weren't. What do you think then, Nigel?
Molten bits, flickering lights, orange flashing beacons. Sounds like War of the Worlds, doesn't it? If thank goodness that Ian P wasn't carrying a kitten, because that would have been catastrophic. But yes, he nicked Stephen with a P. No, it's the other one, you know what I mean. He nicked his bike, so he's the one who's actually should be up for this. And he's made Stephen with a P move to Wales or somewhere, another country, hasn't he? He's had to leave England and go somewhere else.
Yes.
Which I think is all.
Is Stephen with a P the same as Ian with a P?
I'm going a little bit. It's Stephen with a P and Ian was his mate. Hieroglyphics.
Anyway,
could be anything. Could be anything. My brain's short-circuited a bit like the flickering lights. So I am a member of the aggregation of exotic exoneration on this occasion because I absolutely forget. Who would have told anyone about this? No one. I forgive him.
Thanks, Matthew.
This story really illustrates the difference between living in the countryside and living in an urban area. I used to live in rural Cumbria. You get power cuts all the time. Happens in London and everyone's coming out of their houses shouting, "Is it the end of days? Is Armageddon upon us?" No, it's just a power cut. Deal with it. So I'm going to say forgiven.
This is the place where penitents seek our pardon for their sins. Simon Mayo's Confessions Podcast.
Dear Father Simon and the angelic axis of absolution.
Yes, that's
nice.
us.
Yes,
I've
very
had that
good.
before. My confession only dates back a few months to one uncharacteristically warm and humid evening where I found myself wide awake and sweating in bed. Now, normally I would sleep with the window open in this situation, but on this particular evening I was prevented from doing so due to some very loud and very terrible music going thump, thump, thump. I live in a ground floor apartment in a normally quiet and delightfully boring block where all the residents are polite and never talk to each other. It's wonderful. However, over the past year, we've started to see different faces appear regularly as several of the apartments are being let on that website where you can rent out your property for short periods. Well, you know, and why not? I don't really mind, Father Simon. I'm a fairly easygoing chap. People need to make money after all. It's a slight shame that the hosts don't stay there too to keep some kind of order, but what can you do? Now, I've done my fair share of partying and making noise, and I'm given at least a few days' notice. If I'm given a few days' notice, I'm happy to still do so, provided it's on a weekend. These days I have to mentally prepare. I'm over 35, I'm an accountant, I eat hummus, and I also own hiking poles. You must... Which is it? Is it the hummus or the hiking poles that indicates your middle age? I don't know. You most certainly wouldn't find me up partying at 1:30 on a Friday morning with a bank manager coming in a few hours. So to find myself lying awake at this very time while sweating profusely is less than ideal. The music was coming from the apartment on the second floor directly above me. Under normal circumstances, I probably wouldn't be able to hear them, but the guests have the balcony doors open and are continuing the party out there. With my window closed, it's loud. With my window open, it feels like I'm at a gig. Initially, I took the usual approach of tutting disapprovingly and getting flustered, whilst hoping someone else would say something. After a few minutes, I concluded that this was not working and perhaps a different approach was needed. So I got up, put on some clothes and headed upstairs to have a quiet word. After knocking on the door several times, each one a little louder than the last, it was finally answered. What stood before me was a young man of around 20 who looked like a police e-fit, but with none of the charm. "What do you want?" he said.
Oh, it's him.
Well, it has to be him, doesn't it? Well, I say, you see, I was wondering, could you perhaps turn the music down a little, or maybe close the balcony doors, please? But it's awfully loud for the rest of us, and most of us have work tomorrow, and I'd really appreciate it. Thank you so much. Turning his head to look back into the apartment, he shouted, "Here, guys, it's the fun police," before looking back at me and saying, "Whatever you say, officer." Grinning, he then slammed the door in my face. For a few seconds, I stood there in shock. That fun police line was brilliant, and I hated him for it. Then I hated myself for getting this old. I was quickly brought back to my senses, however, as I heard the music volume being turned up. I was quickly brought back to my senses. Now, Simon, as I said, I'm a fairly easygoing chap, but I have my limits. I'd like to think that if my life was a movie, the action music would kick in about now as we head into a montage. I calmly went back down the 2 flights of stairs to my apartment and opened my window to allow the cool breeze to start its work. I then armed myself with various screwdrivers, like I was Rambo about to do some DIY. Heading back out, instead of going up this time, I headed down to the basement car park. After a short walk, I came to a door. With a key code lock, I punched in the combination and I opened it. I used a screwdriver to remove the back plate of the lock and changed the combination to one of my own before closing the lock back up again. I stepped inside the room and grinned mischievously as I eyed a wall full of electricity meters and master trip switches for all the apartments in the block. Cue a side look and wink to camera, says Captain Cheeselover. I walked up to the main trip switch for the noisy apartment, hesitated briefly to savour the feeling of the switch beneath my fingers, and with a quick flick, shut off all their power. Absolutely all of it. No more loud music for them. Bye. No more hot water for your showers that you're sharing with everybody. Lights off, kids. It's time for bed. School tomorrow. Then adds in brackets, don't worry, Sister Bobby, we have a single fire alarm system for the whole block with its own power supply, not individual smoke alarms, so no one was in danger. Close brackets. He's thought of everything. I turned around and sauntered back out of the door, letting it slam behind me. I had correctly guessed that I could be up one flight of stairs and back in my apartment before the noisy people a whole 2 floors above could figure out what had happened. Plus, their brains were a bit hazy. Lying back on my bed, I basked in the glorious moment. Above me, I could hear some muffled voices and the odd choice expletive drifting away on the wind. I couldn't help but smile as I imagined them trying to call their host to sort the problem out at such a late hour. Him telling them the code in the electric cupboard and then the code not working. It was so juicy I could taste it. And it wasn't long before I drifted off into a self-satisfied slumber. Before I knew it, 6:30 rolled around, and even though I was a little tired, I still had a spring in my step. I was out of my apartment by 7:15, quickly went back downstairs to check the lock combo, and everything else was fine. It was, as it turned out, the perfect crime. However, Father Simon, I would like to beg your forgiveness, not from the chap who slammed the door in my face, nor the other noisy people in the apartment, nor do I seek forgiveness from the host, who should select guests with better feedback and explain the rules of the lease to anyone staying there. No audible sound outside the apartment after 10. Thank you very much, you scoundrels. No, Father Simon, I only seek forgiveness from all my fellow 35-plus-year-old peers for besmirching our good name with accusations of being a little bit fun police at times. I still like to have fun, just not on a school night. Okay, everybody, says Captain Cheeselover. Well, we all have our limits, and Captain Cheeselover clearly was pushed beyond his. Sister Bobby Pryor.
We do have our limits, and we all have reasonable limits. I like Captain Cheeselover because he seems reasonable. You know, he's aware that people like to have fun, but I can also see that actually he's completely worn out, and I imagine the rest of the block is too. Also, you went up and said politely, could you turn it down?
Yes.
They could have said, actually, yeah, let's come on, guys, other people have got to go to work tomorrow. You've got to turn it down. What they did is turn it up to say, stuff you. So, you know what? Captain Cheeselover.
Surprised.
You get my absolute forgiveness.
The thing is,
Well
we'd all like to be Captain Cheese. We'd all like to have the answer to that really annoying racket in our hands, and it just turned out that he did.
Yes, and, you know, we all have our limits, and I have thoroughly unreasonable limits. I will not tolerate any noise whatsoever after the hours of darkness have descended. If you do more than whisper, I am knocking on your door.
Well, at 5 o'clock in the
at
evening.
5 o'clock in the evening, I am knocking on your door. Can you keep it down? Some of us are trying to watch the telly, and I'm being distracted by you breathing too noisily. So I'm definitely going to forgive, because I think this is one of the deadly sins that if they'd come up with the list, we'd have put this on instead of perhaps gluttony or lust. We'd have get rid of them, and let's have not having any loud music. So definitely forgiven.
Simon Mayo's Confessions Podcast.
That was Captain Cheeselover's confession in the Airbnb tonight, which concludes this week's batch of confessions. Maybe you've thought of that little dark secret you'd like to share with us. Send it in on the email. But before we leave you, we have another treat from the Confessions Crypt. This week's has been requested by Jane. Please, please, please replay the confession about the sailors who stole a butcher's dummy. I have never laughed so much. It's one of those tales where I thought I knew which way it was going, and then...
I think this is one that would not get on. I don't know how this one got on.
Really?
I don't think this would get on now.
It was very bad in 3 ways.
In 3 ways?
In 3 ways.
Let us count the ways.
Let us count the
Jane,
ways.
just for you then, here is our story of the floating butcher.
The Confessions Podcast.
Simon, this confession is to ask forgiveness not just for myself, but for an entire naval ship's company. I can't say which, as some may still be in the service. It was the early 1980s, and I was an engineer on one of Her Majesty's vessels, which at the time was visiting a port on the western coast of Europe. Most of the ship's company, me included, were ashore doing what sailors do best when off duty, relaxing and taking in the sights, with particular emphasis placed on the local hostelries. After a long day in the cafes of the nearest town, we were walking back toward the docks when we happened to pass by a butcher's shop. Outside this establishment, by way of an advert, was a life-size plastic butcher. Hands on hips, large black moustache, plastic straw boater, and blue and white striped apron. You can picture the sort of thing. At this point, I should make it clear that relaxed sailors are a lot like relaxed students. And if it isn't nailed down, we do have a tendency to relocate or borrow suitable items. This seemed a perfect opportunity for just such a venture, and so, without a further thought, I'm afraid, myself and 3 others, we'll call them Tom, Dick and Harry, scooped up the plastic butcher, and we were on our way back to the docks as fast as we could. We managed to get the butcher back on board the ship and down into the mess hall without being seen. Well, they were really sharp-eyed lookouts there. Just as the others arrived back with a collection of tables, chairs and umbrellas which they had commandeered from outside a cafe. But what were we going to do with all this stuff? Still feeling the effects of our day of relaxation, someone suggested that we should tie the butcher to the mast with gaffer tape. And so in the middle of the night, with a few of the less relaxed crew on hand to help out, we did just that. Meanwhile, the others set the cafe furniture up on the helicopter pad at the rear of the ship. Our work was done, and we all retired to our messes and pits, satisfied with our handiwork. Early next morning, the ship left port and made its way out into the North Sea, with the butcher and the cafe furniture still firmly in place. And this is when it all started to go wrong. Our captain finally noticed the stowaway taped to his mast and the new cafe arrangement on his rear deck and went completely mad. Of course, no one owned up to the crimes, and the captain, having allocated suitable punishment, duly instructed us to get rid of all the evidence. So the butcher and the furniture were ejected directly into the North Sea without further delay. The furniture sunk with no problem, as did the umbrellas with their cement bases, but the butcher refused to oblige. In fact, he floated head and shoulders out of the water, bobbing up and down for all to see. After numerous attempts to sink him, we eventually had to admit defeat, which is a bit worrying, really, considering this is the Navy. Anyway, as time is against us, the ship sailed on, leaving our plastic friend to float around in the North Sea in perpetuity. We were nearly home when one of our on-watch radio operators came running down to our mess with a face as white as a sheet. Apparently, he had just got word that a ship on its way into that same port on the west coast of Europe had reported sighting a man overboard. Oh. And as a result, there was now a major air-sea rescue effort underway in the North Sea with lifeboats and rescue helicopters and all. I would like to ask forgiveness for me and my shipmates. Firstly, for stealing the large plastic butcher. Secondly, for embarrassing not only our captain, but the entire Royal Navy. And thirdly, to the lifeboat and the rescue services for wasting their time and money rescuing a plastic butcher. I've always tried to relieve my guilt by saying to myself that it was good practice for them. Yours truly, Sharky. An awful lot to confess. Let's turn to Brother Matt first. Matt.
Sharky, definitely forgiven. I picture now the rescue team coming up against this plastic bloke saying, he's still managing to hold on to his sausages. Well done, sir. Oh, he's not real. Excellent, definitely forgiven.
Mother Superior.
Well, I actually would forgive him too, but the person I wouldn't forgive is the captain of the ship, who doesn't seem to have any kind of sense of humour as far as it. And if he hadn't thrown it all over the side of the ship, then none of this would have happened. But I think, personally, you are forgiven.
Sister Pauline.
Forgivable on all counts, I think. Who could resist said plastic butcher while feeling that relaxed? And I think the captain didn't behave unreasonably, get rid of the evidence as fast as possible. And it was good practice for the rescue services. He probably all had a good laugh.
I'm sure they did.
Oh, how they would have laughed.
I just slightly worried they couldn't sink a plastic butcher from, a few yards out.
Simon Mayo's Confessions Podcast.
And that was the confession of the floating butcher. What are the 3 ways?
Well, the thing is it really did kind of escalate. I understand hijinks. You know, when you change gates in people's houses, and that's kind of hijinks. And this took it 3 steps too far.
Yes,
It was very wrong.
Yes,
because there was theft. There was
creating a situation.
Created the situation, which was a bit expensive. You can say that it was okay to do that mock rescue, but that costs money.
It does.
It's wrong.
So true. Yeah.
Part-time
Pauline in there as well.
Yeah, part-time Pauline was in there, and Sally as well. So, if there are... Now, the thing is about the Classic Confessions, we can't remember when they all went out. So, as many clues... If there's one that you really want to hear again, give us as many details as you can, and then, due to our unique filing system, we'll try... we'll find it from somewhere. confessions@bbc.co.uk, and we'll do our best to dig it out of the crypt. I had forgotten about the floating butcher, but a very fine tale. Sister Bobby, you forgave every single person.
I know.
What what has come over you?
Well, they were very funny. There was no malice. There was no meanness. So,
Yeah.
Matt, you only forgave 3.
Only 3.
You're 111.5 forgives to 53.5 not forgives.
Still a decent record, that.
Bobby is 84.5 forgives to 81.5 not forgives. So you're still sterner,
Yeah.
but you're softening up.
Well, only when it's due, you know.
Is that right? Mm-hmm. If you made it to the end of the last podcast, you had to tweet pleasingly damp pants, which was a strange message to be getting, because I always forget. I was thinking, why are people saying that? Anyway, Andy Maxwell and Dad,
Imagine that.
why have you got...
What's it, 2 in the morning? What's going on?
Andy Maxwell, Anita, Eddie, Sarah, Heidi, loads of other people did just that. This week's code phrase is... My mum prefers Eddie Mayer.
Oh, yeah, well,
I mean, I wouldn't prefer Eddie Mayer myself.
no.
My mum prefers Eddie Mayer. So remember to subscribe, and don't forget you can hear our whole radio show, because there's 2 hours of this rubbish every weekday from 5 only on BBC Radio 2. Thank you from Bobby Pryor.
Thank you.
Thank you from Matt Williams.
Thank you.
And thank you from me, your host.
Thank you.
Thank you.
The Confessions Podcast. Go in peace.